What if I told you that John Denver, the beloved singer behind Take Me Home, Country Roads, didn't die the way most people think? It sounds unbelievable, right? I mean, John Denver was the kind of person everyone loved. His music was warm and comforting. He had that peaceful, nature-loving vibe that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. But behind that gentle smile and soothing voice was a story that's been hiding in plain sight. A mystery, really. One that fans have wondered about for years. Why did his plane go down that day? Why was he flying it himself? And why was he even in that type of plane to begin with? There's more to it than what the headline said. And when you find out the full story, it's not easy to digest. It changes the way you see him, not in a bad way, but in a human way. A very real way. So let's go back to the day everything changed. It was October 12, 1997. A calm day in Monterey, California. John Denver was getting ready to take a short flight. Nothing fancy. Just a quick trip in a small plane. Something he'd done many times before. But this flight? This one was different. He was flying a Long Easy, a lightweight, experimental aircraft. Not your typical airplane. This model had been built by an amateur and wasn't exactly known for comfort or ease of use. In fact, it had some strange quirks. Like, really strange. One of the weirdest things. The fuel selector valve, the switch that lets a pilot change fuel tanks, was placed in the most awkward spot. It was behind the pilot's left shoulder. Yeah, behind. Which meant that if you needed to switch tanks during flight, you had to twist your whole body around and reach back, which is incredibly risky when you're supposed to be focused on flying. It was like asking someone to steer a car with one hand while trying to reach something in the back seat with the other. You can imagine how dangerous that would be. Now, here's where it gets even more complicated. At the time of that flight, John Denver's pilot license had been suspended. Yep. Suspended. Why? Because he had multiple DUIs. That's right. The same man who sang about mountains, sunshine, and the beauty of life was quietly battling his own personal demons. He had struggled with alcohol for years. He had gone to rehab. Tried to get clean. And he did make progress. But the Federal Aviation Administration wasn't ready to let him back into the air. Still, that didn't stop him. He wasn't legally allowed to fly, but that day, he got into the cockpit anyway. And it wasn't like no one knew. People close to him were aware that he'd been warned. That his license was no longer valid. But the plane was privately owned. It was an experimental aircraft. And because of that gray area in aviation regulations, he didn't technically need a valid medical certificate or a current license for that flight. It was a loophole. One that proved deadly. So there he was, flying solo, in a plane that had design flaws, with controls that weren't easy to manage. And during that flight, something went wrong. Based on what investigators found, the crash happened just after John tried to switch fuel tanks. That awkward placement of the valve forced him to take his hand off the controls. He had to turn his body mid-air to reach it. That small movement threw off the balance of the aircraft. It was enough to send it into a spin. The plane went down quickly. It crashed into the Pacific Ocean. There was no chance to recover. In just a few moments, John Denver was gone. It's a tragic story, right? But here's the thing, it didn't have to happen. And that's where it gets even more heartbreaking. You see, John had mentioned to friends just days before that he didn't feel comfortable in that plane. He knew the layout was odd. He knew the controls were hard to reach. He even admitted that the fuel valve location made him nervous. So why fly it? Why take that chance? People close to him believe he was trying to push through his fear. He didn't want to be seen as someone scared of flying. In fact, flying was one of his great passions. He once said that being in the sky made him feel closer to God. It was his escape. His peace. And for someone who struggled so deeply on the ground, that feeling of freedom in the air meant everything. But even the thing you love the most can hurt you. There's another twist to this story that not many people talk about. The plane had no fuel gauge. Yes, you heard that right. No fuel gauge. Which meant John had to estimate how much fuel was left. He had to guess. He'd switch between the two tanks manually, and just kind of feel it out. Imagine driving a car with no fuel light. No gauge. Just your gut telling you, we're probably okay for another few miles. Now picture doing that in the sky. It's terrifying. The FAA had already warned him about flying. They'd seen the risk. But again, since it was a private flight in an experimental plane, the rules weren't exactly strict. It was a loophole, and John slipped right through it. When the investigation wrapped up, it didn't uncover any big conspiracy or foul play. What it revealed was far more painful. A talented, beloved man who had spent years battling addiction and self-doubt took one risk too many. A man who wanted to fly, who needed to fly, made a mistake. And the design of the plane didn't forgive him. It's hard to hear, especially if you grew up with his music. That image of him, guitar in hand, singing about simple joys and natural beauty, it feels so pure. But John Denver was human. Just like all of us. And sometimes, being human means making choices that don't make sense to anyone else. Not until it's too late. But here's what we can take from this story. John Denver didn't die in some unsolved mystery. The truth is, the warning signs were all there. The plane had issues. He wasn't cleared to fly. And he'd already expressed concern about the aircraft. But love is powerful. And when you love something, whether it's music, or flying, or just feeling free, it's easy to ignore the risks. Have you ever done something like that? Something that scared you but you did it anyway? Have you ever ignored a red flag because your heart told you to keep going? It's something we can all relate to. Sometimes we chase a feeling. Sometimes we just want to prove to ourselves that we can still do something. That we're not broken. That we're strong enough. John Denver wasn't reckless. He was hopeful. Maybe too hopeful. And in that hope, he made a decision that cost him his life. It's hard not to wonder, what if someone had stopped him? What if the plane had a better design? What if he had waited just a little longer before getting back in the air? But that's not how life works. We can't go back. We can only learn. And this story, while painful, teaches us a lot. It teaches us to take warnings seriously. To respect the risks we take. To be honest with ourselves when something feels off. And it also teaches us that even our heroes are human. That behind the smiles and the songs and the fame, there are struggles we don't always see. So now you know. The mystery behind John Denver's death isn't some big conspiracy. It's something much more real. A combination of flawed equipment, a pilot trying to prove something to himself, and a system that didn't do enough to stop it. But it's also a story of passion. Of a man who loved life, loved music, and loved the sky. And even though the ending wasn't what any of us wanted, we still have his songs. We still have his voice. And we still have the memories. And maybe that's enough. So let me ask you something, have you ever taken a risk that didn't end the way you hoped? Something that taught you a hard lesson? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if you found this video moving or eye-opening, check out our next one. It's all about the surprising final moments of other legendary artists. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss a story that helps you feel, think, or just see life a little differently. Take care, and stay curious.